Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into something kind of, well, unsettling.
I'm ready. It's something that's everywhere, but we rarely see it.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so, I don't know, insidious.
That's a good word for it. We're talking about algorithmic bias, basically how AI can end up amplifying some of the worst parts of, well, us.
And we've got a fascinating, if a little unnerving, guide for this deep dive. Christian Ortiz and his book, The Unseen Algorithms.
Which takes us on a crazy ride through 32, count 'em, 32 industries, showing just how pervasive this problem is.
Buckle up, folks, because Ortiz doesn't hold back. So let's
Mhm.
start with the core issue. We hear all the time about how AI is going to revolutionize everything, right? Make things more objective, more efficient.
And there's the catch. What happens when the very tools we use to build AI, the data, the code, even the people writing it, are already steeped in bias?
It's like you're building a house on a foundation that's already a little crooked.
Exactly. Ortiz uses this great analogy of a funhouse mirror. You think you're seeing a reflection of reality, but it's warped, distorted. And in the case of AI, those distortions can have serious consequences.
Okay, so let's get specific. One example that really stuck with me was from the world of hiring. Those AI resume screeners companies are using now.
Supposed to help us find the perfect candidate, right? But Ortiz found that a lot of these systems were actually exacerbating existing inequalities.
Like how? Give me an example.
Well, let's say a company used an AI to screen resumes for, say, software engineers. And historically, most software engineers have been, what, white males?
Hmm. Fortunately, yeah.
So if that AI is trained on that historical data, it might learn to associate things like male-sounding names or schools primarily attended by men with success in that field.
Even if those things have nothing to do with someone's actual ability to code.
Exactly. And suddenly, you've got a system that's screening out perfectly qualified candidates just because of their gender or background.
It's like being judged on factors you can't control. And it's not just hiring, is it? Ortiz talks about similar biases popping up in finance, too.
Oh, absolutely. He gives this example of an algorithm used for loan approvals that was trained on data where people in certain zip codes were denied loans at a much higher rate. And guess what?
The algorithm started redlining those same zip codes, even if the reasons for those past disparities no longer applied.
Exactly. It's like we're accidentally teaching these systems to discriminate, even if that's not our intention. And the really scary part is these biases can have life-altering consequences.
Like in healthcare, which Ortiz also dives into. He talks about how some diagnostic algorithms might be less accurate for women or people of color.
Right, because if the data used to train those algorithms is predominantly from white males, the AI might not recognize the subtle ways a disease might present differently in other groups.
So it's like trying to diagnose an engine problem using a manual written only for one specific type of car.
It just highlights how crucial it is to be aware of these biases because we're talking about people's health, their livelihoods, their futures being impacted. And often it's happening in ways they might not even realize.
And the thing is, it's not always intentional, right? It's not like someone is sitting there programming these AIs to be biased on purpose.
Right, right. A lot of times it's more insidious, more unconscious. Like Ortiz says, those biases can creep in at so many different points.
Like what?
Well, think about who's actually designing these systems. Who's deciding what data to use, what problems to solve?
And if those teams are largely homogenous, like if everyone comes from a similar background, has similar experiences.
Exactly. Then the AI they create is going to reflect that limited perspective. Ortiz actually argues that the lack of diversity in the tech industry itself is a huge part of this problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if you've never experienced a certain type of discrimination, you might not even think to design an AI to avoid perpetuating it.
And that's where this idea of decolonizing AI comes in. It's about questioning the very foundations these systems are built on.
Okay, decolonizing AI. That sounds like a pretty radical idea.
It is, because it's about recognizing that technology is never neutral. It always carries the baggage of its creators, of the societies that produce it.
So, what are some of the assumptions we need to be questioning?
Well, one big one is this idea of objectivity, like that there's one right answer, one universal truth that applies to everyone, because a lot of times that's just not the reality, right?
Especially when it comes to things like, I don't know, culture or identity. What
Yeah.
might be considered normal in one context could be totally different in another.
Exactly. And that's where Ortiz's DIA framework comes in. This idea of building AI that's not just less biased, but actively promotes justice and equity.
Okay, I love that goal, but how do we actually get there? What does that look like in practice?
Well, for one, it means building systems that are transparent. So we can understand how they're making decisions, what factors they're considering.
Instead of it being this black box where data goes in, a decision pops out, and we're just supposed to trust it.
Right. And it also means building in accountability. Like if an AI system does cause harm, there needs to be a way to address that, to make amends.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but the whole ecosystem around it.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus from simply optimizing for efficiency or profit to prioritizing things like fairness, social impact, and human well-being.
Like, we need to embed ethical considerations into the very DNA of these AI systems.
And that's where this idea of justice AI comes in.
So it's not just about removing bias, it's about actively using AI to make things more just, more equitable.
Exactly. And it's not just up to the tech companies to figure this out either. It's on all of us to educate ourselves, to ask tough questions about the AI we're using, and to demand better.
Okay, so how do we actually put this into practice? Like, how do we take those justice AI principles and make them, real?
Well, let's stick with the hiring example for a minute. Imagine you're a company and you realize, okay, our AI might be discriminating against certain candidates.
Right, and you want to fix it. Where do you even begin?
Ortiz talks about this. He says the first step is to really scrutinize the data you're using to train that AI.
Like, hold it up to a light, see where the biases are hiding.
Exactly. Look for patterns. Are there groups that are consistently underrepresented in your data set? Are certain qualifications being overvalued, maybe just because they were common in the past?
So you're basically forcing yourself to confront your own biases, your own blind spots.
Which can be uncomfortable, but it's essential. And then once you've identified those biases, you've got to actively work to correct them.
Like, diversify the data itself.
Yeah. Look for candidates from a wider range of backgrounds, different schools, different experiences. Maybe even consider things like open source coding projects, stuff that might signal talent in ways your old system wasn't picking up on.
So you're essentially teaching the AI to recognize merit in places it might have overlooked before.
Exactly. And this is where transparency comes in. Don't just keep the AI's decision-making process a secret. Let applicants know what criteria it's using. Give them a way to flag potential issues.
And make sure your own hiring managers understand how to use the AI responsibly, right? Like, it's a tool, not the final word.
Absolutely. It's about humans and AI working together, each playing to their strengths. But you know what's really interesting? Ortiz takes this idea a step further. He says, what if, instead of just trying to eliminate bias, we use AI to actively level the playing field?
No, that's an interesting thought. How would that work?
Okay, so imagine that same company using AI to identify promising candidates from underrepresented backgrounds. Maybe the AI analyzes online portfolios, identifies skills that are transferable from other fields, stuff like that.
And then they proactively reach out to those individuals.
Exactly. Maybe they offer mentorship opportunities, connect them with resources they might not even know about.
So it's almost like using AI to undo some of the systemic disadvantages that have historically kept certain groups from succeeding.
Exactly. And that's just one example. Think about the possibilities in healthcare, education, finance. We could use these same principles to design systems that are not just fair, but actively work to close those gaps.
So it's about shifting the mindset from how do we prevent AI from making things worse to how can we use AI to make things better?
Exactly. It's a powerful idea, and it's one that I think we need to be talking about a lot more, because the reality is the future of AI isn't predetermined. It's being written right now.
And we all have a role to play in shaping what that future looks like.
Absolutely. Whether you're a tech CEO, a software engineer, or just someone who uses AI in your daily life, you have a voice in this conversation.
So let's make sure that voice is heard. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to you for diving in with me. This is a complicated topic, and I always learn so much from our conversations.
Me too. It's always a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. If you want to explore these ideas further, be sure to check out The Unseen Algorithms by Christian Ortiz. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand not just the challenges of AI, but also the incredible opportunities it presents. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions.